Hi everyone, this is Cecilia Fung, info researcher and strategist. And I am back from ETHdenver to my comfortable space in LA, surrounded by my beautiful art. What great timing! It's also really interesting to record this episode right now because we just experienced Ethereum upgrade, especially implementing 4844 to create more data storage space on L1 for cheaper rollup transaction. Yes, this year, the biggest topic in ETHdenver is scaling. And I had the opportunity to mingle around with various community members, including researchers, builders, investors, and other participants. And I'm going to bring to you a short video series of interviews with these key infrastructure leaders in the space to share more about their ideas, what they have seen, and some of their insights on their projects. If you're interested, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And I'm super excited to embark on this journey with you. So, before we dive into this whole small series of interviews, I would like to give you some summaries of some of the trends that have been talked about this year, what they mean, and some of their significance. So this is all in context of sort of this market recovery. Perhaps this is an understatement on this. But the first one is, I think everyone is pretty familiar with that, which is modularity. In a broad sense, what modularity, in comparison to what is generally talked about in monolithic chains, is that instead of a single chain that does all the functions from execution, data availability layer to settlement and to consensus, these are increasingly being specialized and handled by different blockchain layers. And the hope is that it will have perhaps better scaling, throughput, and then more customizability for any kinds of the app-specific chains to be built on top of. And I've actually recently just wrote a two-part series on the modularity thesis. So if you're interested, please click on the link below. And the other really important one, and it's pretty much part of this modular thesis, which is scaling. And then there are a number of different components when it comes to sort of the scaling. One of the big narratives this year, which is app chains, and more specifically, apps that's built on building with their own rollups. So what is rollup? Essentially is computation off-chain and data availability on-chain. And there are some other flavors are more like scaling layer 2 solutions are not strictly called rollups. They sometimes would have even data availability off-chain or in some sense, sometimes the settlement off-chain, and they're called like Validium, and then the other one is called sovereign rollup. And what we have seen this year is there are increasingly more of this roll-up as a service type of projects that's going on. Then the goal is that for these app chains to be able to pick and choose different kinds of components that would make sense for their particular use case. And then the other one that we are seeing quite a bit this year, which is share sequencing. And this is something, if you want to understand what share sequencing is, it's basically structurally, in a sense, a little bit similar to the MEV space. What it entails is a highly increasingly specialization of machine labors that instead of one node, which is a sequencer that does all of its function, it's essentially propagated to a separation with different node types to handle different part of the process, if you will. And for share sequencing or decentralized sequencing, one of the main point here is for decentralization without sacrificing for fast block time and ultimately for a more robust system, if you will. And there might be some implication on the interoperability side of things between these individual rollups as well. And then another really interesting one, which is data availability, something I've been personally looking quite more into that. So to explain a little bit what data availability is, it's a really important sort of security function of the blockchain because it allows sort of like independent actors, if you will, to reconstruct the state at the same time to validate whether the state transition is valid or not. So there are different kinds of models that are currently being built out on the data availability side, and then they are, in some sense, constitute some kind of trade-offs. Some would have consensus baked in, some would not. Another trend that we have seen, at least, maybe not necessarily trends, but just a topic that people has been talking about for a while, which is L3, layer 3, right? We talked about scaling on L2, and now we're talking about a layer above of it. Um, so maybe let me give you guys a quick context on where L3 comes from. This idea initially it was proposed by Starkware and expanded by Vitalik. And there are a number of different views on what that vertical stack would look like. So L3, in a sense, is structurally similar to L2. One of the ideas that was being talked about is that with L3 as these customizable app layer, L2 becomes a liquidity layer. Instead of liquidity being on L1, it's going to congregate around some kind of L2. That the L2 itself becomes a vertical of some particular use case. And there's another one, which is written by Vitalik a while back. I also wrote a 2-part piece on explaining Vitalik's vision. But in broad stroke, and Vitalik's vision in the context of L3 is to reduce cost, while at the same time to enable the whole blockchain stack to be hyper-scaling, because computation can be theoretically infinitely compressed because of ZK's recursive proof. So in Vitalik's view, then it challenges what that L2 is, right? In his mind, the alternative approach is L2, instead of just as the current state of L2, it would become a strictly compression layer. So it becomes a middleware. So who knows where it would go, right? This is something that I'm really excited to see more development and more theoretical debate on such kinds of like architecture and where it would go. And another big one this year, which is restaking, essentially is leveraging the Ethereum security to provide that economic security for other modular blockchains. And the idea of this is essentially remove the need for this otherwise, quote unquote, redundant base layer of economic security. I'm not going to mention that word. I know that word is quite sensitive. But there's also this other side of the equation when you're talking about leveraging some kind of security or whatever it is, there's some kind of fine balance to be made. I'm sure there are plenty of the other trends that are going on. I'm not going to cover specifically in detail in this episode, but I do want to touch upon that. Everything we talked about on the infrastructure side, in my mind, is supply of this distributed compute, right? That we are seeing that the supply chain of this distributed compute is being increasingly more robust and specialized. But there's another point that recently, as the market is recovering, that gets me thinking, where are the demand comes from? Because sometimes I thought after going through some cycles before, I've kind of noticed that the demand for this distributed compute in the Web3 space seems a little bit cyclical, in the sense that just intuitively, I wonder if this cyclicality of demand comes from mostly Web3 native and hedge funds. And that sort of in itself connects to this concept of commodity. Because ultimately, I think everything in some sense is going to be commoditized in a way. But if you're thinking about in an economic term, for instance, if you have excess supply of something, even though it's great quality, but your demand is only so little, then is it a race to the bottom situation? And then is it necessary to be healthy for overall ecosystem, if you will? So these days, after the conference and some thinking, I'm just curious if there's a way for some kind of external demand that's not just Web3 native to come into the system to break out of this cyclicality. I don't think you can remove the cyclicality anyway. Cyclicality is anywhere in history or even in this, in macroeconomy, business cycles, right? But in the way that's making it a little bit smoother instead of so volatile at the same time. And sometimes I wonder if we have this kind of exogenous demand of distributed compute, I feel like the most likely place it would come from would be Web 2. Then what is kind of the lower hanging fruit there? Sometimes I wonder if it's payment. And we did see some of the things that's going on the payment side in Asia and in North America and all of that. And yeah, this is just me ranting about looking at all these wonderful people building this robust supply chain. And I'm just curious. We probably need to get some sustainable demand into the space as well. But for the rest of the videos, we'll focus on the supply side. I would be interviewing the thought leaders of the space to share more about what they are seeing, the technical development on the infrastructure side this year, and wisdom from their project. If you like my video series, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And hopefully at some point we'll touch upon the demand side of things. Thank you for watching and hope you have a great day.